Back with Vershan Jackson. Sponsored by Wingstop on 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com.
Is this thing on? It is, Nick. Dang, we back. The captain, the ticket, 93.7 FM on your sports dial if you really want to hear some real radio. Man, listen. I got it. Without further ado, let me stop. A mainstay, a staple, a cornerstone of Nebraska football since 1987. Coach Ron Brown, my coach. Well, my second coach, Coach Ron Brown. How you doing, Coach?
BJ, how are you, man?
Man, I'm excellent.
Thanks for having me on, buddy.
Man, thanks for gracing me with your presence, man. How can we not have Coach Brown, the blocking wizard? Coach, let's just get into it. You coach tight ends and running and receivers, which, if you look in this day and age, there's a tight ends coach, there's a receivers coach. Do you think in this football age you could have done both? And how did you do it back then?
Well, it was a very unusual combination. In fact, when Coach Osborne hired me, or was in the process of hiring me, I asked about it. I said, "You want me to coach the wideouts, tight ends, and wingbacks, or actually three positions?"
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the way he had done it. It's the way he had divided it up. Plus, I was coaching. I had been coaching defense only. I played defense in college, so it was all new to me. But based on the way we did things, we had two offensive line coaches, which was unusual. Two full-time offensive line coaches, Milt Tennifer and Dan Young.
Mm-hmm.
And so that left the receivers coach with having to take, all of the receiver type positions, tight ends, wing backs, split ends. So just the way the Coach Osborne wanted to design it, was the way our system worked. So I was probably one of the last guys ever to do that I know of in college football. Nowadays, you're right, that does not happen anymore. But our system allowed for it, and Coach Osborne was a little bit of a unique guy anyhow.
Aside from, let's just go number one, because we talked a little bit about number one, so I got all types of different questions. Because you coach three positions, you have to answer three times. So top five, aside from the numbers, okay? Aside from the numbers, top five skilled player that you ever coached at Nebraska at split end.
Split end. Oh, boy.
Skilled. Not forget the numbers that they had. Because, if you came to Nebraska, your numbers wasn't getting ready to be stellar anyway at receiver.
Right.
So
we didn't throw the ball a whole lot.
Right. You're going to have to do some other things. Not that we didn't have good receivers that came here. It just was the scheme of things. So aside from the numbers, who would be your top five as far as skilled at split end?
Well, we had a guy named Jon Bostick, if you remember. John was a 6'2", about 190-pound guy who could vertical leap about 39 inches. He was a 4.5 guy. He was drafted by the Denver Broncos. He was a first-team all-conference wide receiver in the system that we played in. And he was probably as good a clutch receiver that we had during those years that I was coaching him. I mean, he was a great cold weather receiver, for example. I mean, he and Johnny Mitchell would make fabulous catches and have great games in really unseemly conditions. Wind, snow, rain, cold, it didn't matter. They were spot on when it came to catching the football. So, and Bostick was an exceptional route runner. We did a lot of things with him that way. We had slant and goes, we had slant and fades. We did different things with John because he was just pretty precise route runner. So he was a very skilled, I think, wide receiver. Probably didn't get a lot of a ton of credit for it, but like I said, the NFL recognized him. They drafted him. Morgan Gregory was awfully good. He was a very, again, very similar to Jon. They both played at the same time. Great hands. Morgan was an excellent blocker as well. Very strong kid. But Reggie Ball was a guy who had great speed. During the championship years, Reggie was a smaller receiver, part of what we call the itty bitty committee, but he had exceptional speed, can go up, get the ball. Maybe the best all around guy though at split end was Corey Dixon. Corey was exceptionally quick, had 10,400-meter speed, was super tough, very strong, didn't have very big hands, VJ, but he really improved his hands as time went on. You know, all the balls we used to throw all the time in practice to catch and improve your catching. So I would say, you know, I could go on, but I would say those three guys really stand out to me during the time that I was coaching wide receivers. Matt Davison was probably, you talked about Bostick being clutch. Matt was super clutch. And his, you know, not only the Miracle in Missouri game, but his career. I mean, he was a big time guy in big games. Without him as a true freshman in 1997, he and Bobby Newcomb both were receivers for me as true freshmen. We probably don't win the national championship that year. So Matt Davison clearly on the list as well.
And so that leads me to ask you this question. How did you convince Kenny Cheatham that he should come here and not play basketball?
Well, you know, I recruited Kenny, and when I was recruiting Kenny, he was a junior out at South Mountain High School in Phoenix, and he was an exceptional athlete. But here's the thing: Kenny was a top 100 high school basketball player. He was also a track All-American. He was the 100-meter champion, 200-meter champion in Arizona, and I think the 100-meter runner-up. So he was being recruited by Tennessee for track and football. He was recruited by Kansas to play basketball, and then here I am trying to get in the mix, and he's not even playing football. His senior year, he decided not to play football.
Wow!
And so a lot of the football guys backed off of him. I kept calling Kenny. You know, I was one of those guys that just said, I'm not taking no for an answer. So I just kept calling Kenny, and I said, Kenny, you need to really consider football. And so he's being recruited, and I called the basketball coach at Kansas one day, and the assistant coach that was recruiting him, and I said, are you guys really recruiting Kenny? And, you know, he says, hey, Coach, I'll get back to you. He must have called Kenny and told him that, you know, Kenny, as good a basketball player as you are, we probably, you know, at the bottom line, you're probably not a KU basketball player, but you are a good basketball player. Next thing I know, Kenny Cheatham is picked up football, and halfway through the season, his senior year, he resumed to play football again. And that's really probably why we got back in it with him. And he ended up signing with us in June after the signing date. He was a very unusual guy, but Kenny was an extremely talented guy, very talented. I think sometimes with Kenny, it was just a matter of focusing on the thing that you had to do to really be good. 6'4", 220 pounds, and a fast guy. And he ended up really, I think, making a lot of progress while he was here. He really helped us win a lot of games as well.
What about top 5 split end blocking?
Well, you know, Corey was. They were all really good blockers. They all got to be good blockers. Corey was a great blocker. Rod Smith, when I first got here, was a tenacious blocker and a really good hands split end. But Rod was probably he's a pretty nasty blocker, chop block, stock block down the field. But, you know, and Corey Dixon, again, as I mentioned, Morgan was very good. Jon Bostick got better. Matt Davison got better. You know, I had Trumane Bell out there for a while as a split end, and he was a big physical guy. We ended up moving him to tight end his senior year, but as a junior, coming right out of junior college, Trumane was I think a very powerful, potent wide receiver blocker. So, yeah.
What about
all those
wingback?
guys
What about wingback?
Oh man, a lot of great wingbacks, as you know.
You know who comes to my mind first?
Who's that?
The Vedral.
Well, Vedral was probably as tenacious of a blocking wingback as we ever had. He was really a good receiving wingback. You know, he had good hands. He knew how to get open, but he was probably the most physical wide receiver, maybe one of the most physical we ever had here. Irvin Fryer was a fantastic physical blocker. Probably the best all-around wingback to ever play here was Irvin Fryer, along with, Johnny Rogers was a great receiving wingback. Irvin might have been the best all-around guy. But John Vedral, super tough guy. Maybe the most pound for pound, inch for inch, the most efficient, toughest kid maybe to play in this program.
Wow.
Who played wingback was Abdul Muhammad.
Wow.
Abdul Muhammad was 160 pounds. He would stop Mike linebackers in their tracks on cracks. He'd go in there and hit Ray Lewis. He'd go in there and, Abdul was also a tremendous receiver in terms of catching the ball, getting blasted, hanging on the football. Maybe the smartest receiver in terms of, you remember I used to give you all tests, right? Written tests before the games. And Abdul was the one receiver that knew every single assignment by every offensive player on our team on every play. He knew what the offensive line was doing. He knew what the running backs were doing. He knew what the quarterback, how he was thinking. He understood coverages, defense. He was a very, very bright receiver. He took a lot of pride in it. He hated getting a 99 on his test. He wanted 100. Every little point he was scrapping for. But he was an outstanding player, and again, a catalyst to our national championship team in '94.
What about Clester Johnson?
Clester was, and I like the way you're doing it because that helps my memory. But Clester was, a part of a group. Clester at first was a quarterback. We recruited him out of Bellevue West. Outstanding athlete. He was and then he went over to the defensive side of the ball with Coach Darlington. But he was kind of people weren't quite sure what to do with him. And I remember raising my hand in the meeting room, and I said, "Look, give me Clester. I'll take him. I'll make him a wingback." And Coach Osborne said, "Okay, let's see what you can do." Clester came over, and it took a little while to get going, but he was perfect. He was perfect for what we needed. We needed a big, strong guy in the slot, and that's who Clester was. He was kind of a quasi-linebacker, tight end, running back. He had all those, he was mixed in like that. He was kind of a hybrid. And at times, we would even line up Clester at tight end. We would sneak him in there at tight end, and the defense wouldn't even recognize it. And then here comes a fast guy running down the field, making plays. So Clester was a terrific perimeter blocker because he was so strong. But he really became an excellent player for us, and I think it was a great move for us to get Clester at the wingback spot with his size, especially.
Yeah, he had over 100 yards in that Arizona State game from the tight end position, which is crazy to think about that.
Yeah, well, he really developed his hands, and what I liked about Clester, sometimes I think a lot of guys come in thinking, well, I'm going to be this position and I'm going to be a star and blah, blah, blah. And it didn't work out like that for Clester. Quarterback, he bounced around the DB, and it was almost like he wasn't sure of where he was going to be, and nobody else was. And when wingback was perfect. Not many schools have a wingback position where you kind of get to do a little bit of running back, a little bit of receiver, a little bit of, coming to motion in the backfield. He's kind of an H-back. Sometimes you line him up at tight end. He was just great for that. He was perfect for it. It was just a matter of us, getting him to understand all those dynamics. And once he understood the offense and his work ethic really improved, I think as time went on, he became an extremely efficient player for us.
Coach, how good was when you talk about you guys coming out of the three-point stance, how good would you have to be an athlete to come out of a three-point stance and then run a route and then catch the ball. Like, what was that philosophy back then to be in the three-point stance?
Yeah, we were in a three-point stance. We were probably one of the last college teams to do that. But, people kind of laughed at us for that. But I remind people, the last team in the NFL to do that was the San Francisco 49ers with Jerry Rice and Dwight Clark, Joe Montana. Those 49er teams, Bill Walsh coach teams, they were the last team in the NFL to be in three-point stances. So, I think sometimes the three-point stance made it a little bit – a lot of people thought it was easier to maybe bang them around press coverage. It was harder in my mind. As I studied it, and I know I played corner and safety in college, it was a tougher deal to squat a guy, I think, that was coming out of a three-point stance, particularly if that kid knew how to come low and fast and play at good pad level. We ended up standing up after a while and kind of conformed to the rest of the modern-day college football world. But, what the stand-up receivers had a little bit better advantage of was reading coverages. And after a while, we were starting to get more coverages that we had to read. Man coverages, zone coverages, disguises, those kinds of things. So we learned how to – but even though we were standing up after like the 30 in 1989, I think we started to stand up our receivers. I didn't want anybody coming out of a stance. I didn't want them standing straight up in the air. They needed to get about 80% of their weight over their front leg, even in a 2-point stance where they were standing up, because I didn't want to see guys standing straight up in the air and then take all day to get out of their stance to get down the field. So we still, even though we didn't put our hand down, VJ, like you tight ends were doing, we still wanted the receivers to be in a very efficient pad level stance.
Coach, you, and we'll talk a little bit more about tight ends and get back to this, but 17 seasons under Coach Osborne from 87 to 03, 6 seasons under Pelini, 5 years under Coach Solich, now under Coach Frost. You've been around for a long time. When you look at just what have been some of the nuances, what have been some of the good, bad, the ugly, as far as being around all these different coaches, yet you remain the same as far as your skill, the position that you coach, running back, tight end, receiver, wing back, all these different, and you play defensive back. That explains why I dropped a bunch of balls. But we're gonna go on a limb and blame you, Coach. But listen, so being under all those different regiments, talk just about the times, and because you can talk to the times and all that different stuff coming from Coach Osborne in 87 all the way up to 2022 today.
Football is really football, VJ. And there are a lot of, there are principles that are going to be the same 1,000 years ago and 1,000 years from today if the world goes that long. There are just certain things physically that have to continue to take place in the football game. You have to play with great pad level. You have to play with great energy, tremendous effort. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be a thinker and a fast, critical thinker, being able to make decisions. You become a product of your training. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall back on your training. So no matter what the position is, people can learn the different aspects and the different techniques of different positions, which is what I did. That's why I coached all those skill positions on offense and skill positions on defense. I didn't plan it that way. It's just the way the Lord set it up. It's just the way I was hired. People thought that I could figure it out, get it put together, and I'm grateful for that. I love it when a young coach has he's coached a variety of different positions. I think it's really going to help him. I think there's going to be carryover when you do get hired. I think you make yourself more marketable if you want to be hired. And if you become a coordinator or a head coach, you're going to have a much better feel because you've had all those positions under your belt as to how they think and so forth, how they carry themselves on the field. But bottom line, VJ, is, that being in this system, you were required. I don't care what position you played, you better be a physical war daddy. We were the most physical team in college football. That's the way it's got to be. You got to throw your body around. There were no calculated loafs. There was no room for a person deciding that, I think I'm just going to take a play off. None of that stuff. You also were driving people down the field. That's a huge phase of blocking, is the drive portion of the block. It's the final portion of every block, whether you're a lineman coming off the ball at the line of scrimmage, or a tight end, or you're a wide receiver out wide, or you're a fullback leading. You know that when you make contact, the key is to move that defender. You've got to drive that defender. It can't be stalemates, and it can't be just sideways, parallel sideways movement. You've got to drive people toward the other end of the field. When you get that, and when that's happening, and when you learn all the little nuances of the skills of carrying the football, releases, if you're a quarterback coach, throwing the ball and all those kinds of things. But if you keep that mentality of we're moving the ball down the field, we're moving men down the field, I think you're going to be good.
Is cut blocks a thing of the past? Because you were the master. You were the master at teaching us how to throw, when to throw, what position to throw, when to stay up. You might have to stone. You might have to fake a stone block, and then come back down and chop them down. Is that because of the rule changes? Is that a thing of the past?
Yeah, it's really hard. Nowadays, the rules make it such that, first of all, you cannot chop block 5 yards plus downfield from the line of scrimmage as an offensive player. You can't go backwards on a player, which sometimes you weren't really allowed to do that before. At times, some schools got away with it. But now you have to be what they call 10-2 on blocking surface. So think about driving a car 10-2, or think about a man's body 10-2. So you've got, from one shoulder to the other shoulder, or one kneecap to the other kneecap. That block, anytime it's below the waist, it has to be within that cylinder. So I can't come in and blindside you with a chop block anymore. I can't even blindside you high anymore if it's a vicious hit. There are probably 70% of the blocks that were allowable back in the 80s and the 90s when you played are not even allowed anymore. So you do have to teach blocking differently today. No less tenacious, though. Mm-hmm. You should be tenacious in the blocking technique that you're allowed to do. But you just don't. You just are not able to hit people. It's just like on defense; those guys aren't able to hit people where they used to hit them in the past. But you still have to become a great tackler. So yeah, we're playing with a different set of rules.
Yeah, and I look at that and I'm like, would we have won the championships if we couldn't chop block? I don't know.
I don't know, really, Coach. Tough, But you know what? Think about it. Army, Navy still do it. Now they can't do it downfield, but they chop at the line of scrimmage. So I think the game has changed enough because of those rules that those teams aren't as effective as they used to, and it might have cost us, particularly in the option game, in the perimeter game, when we were coming out of center with a quarterback, a running back, and an option phase. And now we're trying to leverage people and mow them down and chop them down. We would have had to have learned how to stay up. I still think we would be good, though, Vershan. I don't think that we would have. I think we would have. It probably would have cost some efficiency, but I still think we were good because we were good at staying up and driving people.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
yeah, that's absolutely true. And Coach, we got to take a break, but when we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about blocking downfield. Why is it important? Because I think people think that running backs, they do all this, glit and glam, and they get all these yards on their own. But how important, I'm with Coach Brown of Nebraska, how important when we get back is blocking down the field for a receiver, tight end, or anybody, even offensive lineman, the captain, the ticket, 93.7.